I'm Carole Taylor. On this edition of Journal, we're going to jump into the fray and take a close look at the blizzard of housing announcements, 62 at last count, that have come from all levels of government in just this past year. Many are promising affordable housing. Finally, our politicians have noticed the angst in our community about the cost of housing, rising mortgage rates, the lack of housing options, but at the same time, the fear of density. The important question is, besides all of those photo ops, will these initiatives make a difference? Will Vancouver ever be affordable, or is that just a pipe dream? The overriding issue is supply. Too many people chasing too few units. Of course, our recent immigration and temporary resident policies have exacerbated this problem. Last year, more than 1 million people entered Canada, while only 250,000 new homes were built. And according to CMHC, we were already in a housing deficit. Bob Rennie has spent his life in the real estate business and knows all the sides of this complicated issue. The difficulty new buyers have in jumping into an expensive market. The challenges of being a developer at a time of higher interest rates and construction costs. The complications of ever-changing municipal zoning regulations, and the fees and taxes that invisibly add to the final cost of a new home. Bob is a data collector. For many years, I would look forward to his annual address on trends and complications in the real estate market, and I'd be furiously taking my notes. And in fact, we worked together on designing a flipping tax in an attempt to slow down the rapid rise in housing prices caused by speculation. But that was way before any politician was interested. Bob Rennie joins me after this break. Welcome back. You know, Bob, I mentioned how you've always been so generous with data. Thank you. And your folks had a look at the spread of all these announcements that are coming at us. And I'm telling you, like, I pay attention to this, especially the public policy. I can't figure it out.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. But the only reason that we have those 62 initiatives, and it's 56 since January 1st, 23, is because you asked me last week how many there were. I went to our economists and demographers and said, Carole needs the list. Otherwise, well, I don't think we would know the exact number.
And so let me say to you, just looking at it generally, are all of those initiatives and all those announcements going to bring affordable housing?
No. You know, the city of Vancouver, we can't change interest rates. We can't change construction costs. So land is the only variable that we can play with. But it's going to be very hard to get real affordability into the city. And, you know, you look at all of the initiatives and all of those bills, and they're very good intentions. But you need, once it leaves federal and province and down to the city, you need every planning department to have an absolute buy-in and leadership to have these initiatives take place. The trouble is with a lot of them, if you look at some of the recent provincial initiatives, we've got some mayors up in arms because it is a one-size-fits-all. I believe if everybody locks themselves in a room, you'll be able to fine-tune it to each city. But we have to be careful when we say we can build 4 homes on a 33-foot lot. Is that 8 cars and 8 garbage cans? Where does the parking go? So it's, you know, one of my last UDI talks when we did our State of the Nation, I said that if I owned the city of Vancouver, I would take from Main Street to Boundary, and I think I used 41st down to the water to the north, rezone it all townhomes. But you could only decant 5 to 7% of the area per year. So it takes away speculation because I know I can get in next year's allotment, and it adds certainty to a neighborhood so they see some controlled growth. But when you say 4 homes on a lot, I would rather see 3 homes on 1 lot, 9 homes on 2 lots, and 40 homes on 3 lots, so that there's amalgamation, because it's pretty tough to go underground with parking on a 33-foot lot. So there's huge expenses. The intentions are there, but we really need to see, it's coming from top down, we need to see from bottom up that they're really fine-tuning it.
So we were talking here about the Premier's efforts to say, okay, as a province, we're going to force municipalities to upzone. And I've got to confess that I see both sides of this issue, because when I was on council, I would say, well, province can't tell me what to do. I know my neighborhood better than anybody. The province is sitting there saying we're putting in billions into infrastructure and rapid transit, and municipalities always say, I promise we're going to put in high density, and then they don't. And so I can see this frustration that forced this decision to say, I've had it with you guys. You're going to put, especially along transit lines, you're going to put high density.
Yeah, if you look at the Canada line, we saw density change on Cambie, and prices skyrocket per square foot for land, and then 4 or 5 years later, you know, they did the arterials, they did Cambie, they did 25th, they did 41st, they did 49th. 5, 8 years later, they go, well, let's start to look at the shoulder streets. But we'd already reached astronomical prices per square foot per buildable. Had they done it all at once, we wouldn't have seen that increase. So when the Premier was elected, we got together, and I suggested that the province offer political cover to our cities, our mayors and councillors, because housing's been so politicized, that if there was an incentive that if you could approve a rental unit from application to approval within 12 months, the city was given $10,000 per door. If it was non-market housing, $15,000 per door if approved in 12 months. And if it's a condominium in the city of Vancouver for home ownership under $1 million, $7,500 per door. And in the region, if it's under $750,000. And Premier Eby said to me, well, that's all carrots. And I said, but you own all the sticks. You guys can figure that out. But housing is so politicized that mayors and councils are elected and unseated over the word density, over the word developer, and over the word investor. The underpinnings of some of that is in there, but it has to be implemented. I give a shout out to, I'm wandering all over here, Carole, but I give a shout out to Mayor Mike Hurley in Burnaby. You know, when I cross the border, if I don't tick off the 4 boxes, I don't get across. What happens is a lot of developers submit their plans 70 to 90% ready, and there's an intake. Burnaby is switching to, unless you tick off, I'm exaggerating the boxes, all 32 boxes, there's no intake. Because what happens, the developer puts it in without everything there, and 6 months later, the city staff go back and say, but we're missing this, we're going to have to start over, and the developer's crying foul about the city. So we just need absolute systems. It's a science.
It's wonderful that you can see both sides, because when you say it gives cover to certain politicians, it is true that at the municipal level, you've got a development that has some density. I went through it. Dunbar, we tried to put some seniors housing in there. And of course, every relevant neighbor comes and is in your face arguing their warranted case, but they're arguing their case. No one comes and argues the city's case. So you're down to spot zoning everywhere, which I don't think is the answer. But if the province has said you have to do it, then that gives some cover to politicians saying, well, this is what we got to do.
And when you go to public hearing, the same 4% of the community that hates you still hates you. You don't change their mind. It's trying to get people out to be positive, but to be supportive of development. Who wants to take that social attack and show up? So I noticed in one of the bills, because I started reading through them all, that as long as there's a community plan already in place, there's no need to go to public hearing. And that's the cleansing that we need. We have to start to streamline it.
Well, and we both know of a development down in Chinatown that was within the community plan, didn't ask for any exceptions, nothing, and it got turned down.
Yeah, and I was just at an event. I bought some gates for a Success housing project on Success, the nonprofit, on Carole Street. And the seniors would not open their blinds or go out into the little alleyway because of the demographic that was there. So we put gates on either end. They now have a park. But I said to them, had that development gone ahead on Kiefer that we're referring to, Success would have had another 20 seniors housing units. That all got thrown out, became so politicized because they would have lost too many votes at that time in the Chinatown area, and it never happened. But Chinatown cannot be saved unless you save Hastings Street. And that building, had it been approved then, I would have people that work for a living, walking to work and walking home and using the facilities of the street instead of everything closed in Chinatown and all graffiti.
Can Chinatown be saved?
Not without saving Hastings Street. And when you see the concentration of non-market that's going in, 58 East Hastings, we need housing, but it's too much concentration. 301 Hastings, I think there's another 220 units going in. And then the Balmoral, when it's rebuilt, I think there's 150 plus. It's too much concentration of a very challenged demographic.
We're going to take a brief break and then continue this conversation along with the credibility of politicians who promise the world. And we're back with Bob Rennie. You know, Bob, one of the things that worries me about politicians opening the door, making an announcement, closing the door, opening the door, making another announcement. So yeah, they get the front page of the paper. But in terms of what can be accomplished, I think there's a credibility gap. CMHC said last year in Canada we built about 224,000 homes. Trudeau makes his announcements, and then he said that his announcements will allow us to build 500,000 a year for 5 years. Can the construction industry even possibly do it? Doesn't matter how much money's thrown at it.
You know, Angela Cook, who was, I don't want to devalue her role with David Eby, I want to say a deputy minister, but on housing really early in his election, I was speaking to her and I said, I need 10,000 homes a year, and she dropped the phone. She made that loud noise, picked it up and said, but you can't execute. That is our problem. Is it's a Rubik's Cube and you have to look at all sides. And housing has been so politicized. As I said earlier, you can be unseated or elected based on how you're going to treat density. But we you know, in business, anything we do at year end, we have metrics to look at what are we achieving. So all of these initiatives, I need metrics 12 months later to see where it's been implemented. But you know, right now, it takes you longer to get entitlements than it does to build the building. So how are you going to provide those? I think CMHC came out with, you need 3.5 million homes in the next 10 years, and that would literally be building a tower a day if you put the key in the door today.
And so we know that's not going to happen. So I think that a lot of people tune out all of these initiatives, some that are good and some that are just pie in the sky, I think.
Well, looking at it holistically, then they'll pick on immigration. So in British Columbia right now, we have more deaths than births without immigration. So we need immigration. I need somebody to bring me a bedpan and be my lawyer 20 years from now. And we need people to pay taxes, or we will be paying 80% taxes. But we can't stop having immigration, yet you'll have in this election coming up where immigration is attacked. And it's race baiting because it makes us pick on our Asian population when we shouldn't be.
Don't you think that the foreign buyers tax, when it was brought in, was racist?
You're baiting me, Carole.
Would you say, Bob?
But we, you know, for your listeners, Carole and I probably spent a few months at looking what a flipping tax would really look like, that once you put your name on title, if you sell in year 1, you're heavily taxed, year 2, year 3, until you got down to normal capital gains. And what Carole and I were trying to accomplish is to maybe push that speculative flipper out of the lower end of the market. And also, once you buy it, that you create rental supply. And instead, our premier at the time, Christy Clark, she put in a foreign buyer tax. And the foreign buyer tax blamed everything on the Asian population, yet 80%, 85% of all speculation was done by locals. And people are not speculators when they buy. But if the market moves 50% over 3 years when you put your deposit down till later, you're going, you know what? I can now send the kids to USC. I can now have my wife and I can retire earlier. All these reasons come in and you turn into a speculator, but you weren't when you bought it.
You know, when we talk about all this need for more housing and government's now trying to push housing and units, how come the developers are having such trouble? Because we see so many projects that are now on pause, some that they're walking away from because the numbers aren't working anymore.
The pro forma just doesn't work out. You know, if a developer can't make his 12 to 15%, which is unacceptable in America, is why you don't see a lot of American developers here. None. If the developer can't make that, he's better to go to Hawaii and just invest his money elsewhere. So the pro forma isn't working. Right now, we did a building for, our company does obviously pre-sales and we advise the development community, but we also do rent-ups, lease-ups in new buildings. And for Great West, we did a building at Cordero and Robson. When we started, we thought we would get just under $5 per square foot for rent, which makes a 500 square foot suite $2,500 a month. It's hitting it out of the ballpark for a return for the developer. We ended up at about $5.80 per square foot. At $6 a square foot, it's $3,000 a month for that suite. Has nothing to do with local incomes. Well, now every developer building, if they don't get that $6 per square foot, they can't build. It just, at today's interest rates, it just doesn't pencil out. So we're seeing a lot of people put tools down, seeing if rates come down. But as you know, rates will come down whether it's September or whether it's February. It's just like coming out of COVID. We all said, I don't know whether it's September or February, but the market's going to react because there's pent-up demand. So if we're going to come out in September or February, I can either give you absorption or I can give you price. I can't give you both.
What does absorption mean?
So if it's a pre-sale in condominiums, I can sell out a tower at this price, or I can sell it out over 3 years at a higher price. But I can't give you both.
I would expect that interest rates are affecting both sides of the equation. It's obviously affecting developers and construction costs, but on the other side, it must be affecting home buyers because they've got to look for mortgages. And you've told me before, often the way they get that down payment is from their parents, but their parents are now squeezed with their own mortgage.
Yeah, so buying power is way down because rates have doubled, so you can't buy what you expected to unless you've seen huge wage increases. But on the parents, I ran the numbers knowing I was going to be on here. Right now, if you're 55 years of age and older, you're sitting on $444 billion worth of clear title housing in Greater Vancouver. That number
again?
$444 billion clear title. That's not with a $10,000 line of credit. Clear title. That $444 billion, 18 years ago in 2006, was worth $66 billion. I discovered that number, made the front page of the Vancouver Sun. Bob Rennie says, which of course we love to read. And so that huge tax-free gain living in your housing and clear title, and $102 billion of it's owned by over 75-year-olds.
And so that will move.
We are seeing the transfer of wealth by the living, not by the dead. I don't have a polite way to say it, but typically estates transferred the wealth. But now the parents are seeing a huge tax burden, threats of tax maybe we'll see a federal tax on principal residences.
Oh, you're kidding.
Could you imagine if a 1% tax came in?
Are you kidding me? I know the guys in the finance department talk about it, but I can't imagine a politician
I was
talking about
at a dinner with Stephen Poulos, our former head of the Bank of Canada, and I said, "Are you looking at taxing principal residences?" And he said, "No, it became just too complicated." I said, "I just thought you guys would put a 1% transfer tax." He said, "What?" And I thought, "Oh no, I don't want to be responsible for this conversation." We ran the numbers, and if that was put in 2007, I think they would have raised $27 billion. I don't have the exact number, Carole, so I don't want to fall on that sword. But my aging baby boomer, 55 plus, especially over 75, they're seeing the threat of taxation. Jagmeet Singh said if you earn over $1 million a year, it should be 80% tax. We've got others saying that humans should not own houses. It should all be owned by the state. Oh, that was Teresa, who's no longer a city planner.
Did she say that?
Effectively, in a meeting, she said, "What % of homes sell to investors in a pre-sale?" And I said, "Probably 60%. She said, "I will never approve strata again."
And on that note, that's a definitive note.
Well, it needs a lot more conversation than that. But
Thank you, Bob.
Okay, first of all, what you do with your legends, with these conversations is, it's an honor to be on here, but you really sew the fabric of my city together, and it is so necessary. Thank you.
Bless you. We'll be right back. It is good that the housing crisis is getting attention these days from all levels of government, but the plethora of trial balloons risks masking the underlying truth. We cannot build fast enough to meet the needs of our rapidly growing population. With more than 62 policies announced, many overlapping, coming from all directions, no one can be held accountable. So what to do? I'd like to know your thoughts on YouTube. Till next time, I'm Carole Taylor.